In her diary, Saint Faustina recorded a moment marked by fear and reverence. "I was led by an angel to the places of expiation. I saw them suffer terribly, yet at the same time I saw their great love for God. The fire seemed to penetrate them, and yet they praised divine justice." Diary 20. What struck her was not only the suffering, but the movement, an intense trembling, as if the fire itself responded to the longing of the souls within it. Have you ever wondered what it means for purgatory to tremble, not with destruction but with desire? Have you ever considered that the suffering of these souls might be active, alive, reaching outward, rather than collapsing inward? And have you ever asked yourself why Saint Faustina said the souls were not silent, but calling not in despair, but in hope? It was the year 1932 when this revelation marked Faustina's soul with a seriousness she never forgot. In the quiet of the convent, where the walls held prayer like breath, Jesus allowed her to see purgatory not as a distant doctrine, but as a living reality. Saint Faustina understood immediately that what she was being shown was not meant for curiosity. It was a call to responsibility. If you wish to understand the real revelations Jesus entrusted to Saint Faustina, revealed not to frighten but to awaken, subscribe and stay with us. That night, as Faustina withdrew into prayer, she felt her guardian angel near her once again. Without noise or spectacle, she was led into a place filled with intense heat and movement. It was not chaos, but it was not stillness either. The fire seemed alive, trembling as if responding to the longing of the souls within it. And in that trembling, Faustina perceived something deeply unsettling and holy at the same time. The souls were calling. They did not cry out in rebellion. They did not accuse God. They called in longing, in recognition, in trust. Their voices were not heard with the ears, but felt in the soul. They were calling for prayers, calling for love, calling for remembrance. Faustina felt their cry pass through her like a current, leaving her heart aching. She understood then that purgatory is not passive suffering. It is active purification. The souls are awake, aware, burning with desire for God. And because of that desire, their suffering trembles. It moves, it presses forward. The fire shakes because love is at work within it. What startled Faustina most was how close the souls felt to her. Not distant, not unreachable. They were near enough to be helped, near enough to be heard, near enough to be forgotten by those on earth who no longer think of them. Jesus allowed her to feel that their greatest pain was not the fire, but abandonment, not being remembered, not being prayed for. As the vision unfolded, Faustina realized something that pierced her deeply. Heaven listens to the prayers of the living, and purgatory depends on them. The trembling she saw was not fear, it was urgency. Souls longing to be lifted by mercy offered on earth. When the vision began to fade, Faustina remained shaken. She knew that what she had seen demanded a response. Silence would no longer be possible. When Faustina returned to herself, her body still knelt in prayer, but her heart was racing as if it had traveled a great distance. The trembling she had witnessed did not leave her. It echoed within her spirit like a distant vibration, steady and urgent. She understood that what she had seen was not a single moment, but a continuous reality, purgatory in constant movement, stirred by longing, purified by love. Later that morning, as the convent slowly awakened, Faustina moved through her duties with a quiet seriousness. She washed dishes, swept floors, greeted the sisters with a gentle nod, yet inwardly she felt surrounded by the memory of those calling souls. Their cry had no sound, but it pressed against her heart with a force she could not ignore. She realized that purgatory trembles because it is alive with expectation. Every prayer offered on earth sends a wave through that place. Every mass causes the fire to shift. Every act of mercy creates movement. As she paused near a window, watching the light spill across the courtyard, Jesus allowed her to understand something few truly grasp. The souls in purgatory are intensely aware of the prayers offered for them. When someone remembers them, when a heart lifts their suffering to God, the fire responds. It does not extinguish, but it loosens. It trembles, as if mercy itself were passing through the flames. Faustina felt this truth settle deep within her. The trembling she had seen was not fear, it was responsiveness. Purgatory is not a frozen state, it is dynamic, it reacts to love, it shifts when grace is poured out. The souls are not passive victims, they are active recipients of mercy, leaning toward every prayer offered in their name. That afternoon, while kneeling in the chapel, Faustina felt once again the presence of her guardian angel beside her. Without words, he made her understand that the cries she had felt were not demands but invitations. Souls in purgatory do not accuse the living of forgetfulness. They wait. They hope. They call silently, trusting that love on earth will eventually answer. She bowed her head, overwhelmed by the responsibility this truth carried. How many prayers are wasted on fear, she wondered, when they could be offered in mercy? How many souls remain longer in the fire simply because no one remembers them? Jesus allowed her to feel the sorrow of heaven, not sorrow at the souls being purified, but sorrow at the indifference of those who could help but do not. As she prayed, Faustina whispered softly, "Jesus, let me be a voice for those who have none." And in that moment, she felt a gentle assurance fill her heart. Every prayer offered with love reaches where it is needed. No act of mercy is lost. No remembrance is forgotten. She understood then why Jesus had shown her purgatory trembling like fire. It trembles because love is constantly moving through it. It trembles because mercy is never still. And it trembles because souls are waiting, calling, not with despair, but with hope that someone on earth will remember them today. As the day slowly unfolded, Faustina felt as though she were walking between two worlds. Her feet touched the familiar stone floors of the convent, yet her heart remained near that trembling place of fire. The calls she had sensed were not cries of pain, but movements of longing like waves pressing toward the shore. She understood that the souls were not calling her personally. They were calling the living, calling love itself. While tending to her duties, she paused often, pressing her hand lightly against her chest as if to steady herself. Jesus allowed her to perceive another layer of the mystery. The souls in purgatory cannot speak to the living with words, but their desire rises continuously before God. That desire itself becomes a prayer, pure, burning, unstoppable. And God, in His mercy, allows that prayer to stir the hearts of those still on earth. In the chapel later that afternoon, Faustina knelt alone, the space quiet except for the faint creak of wood settling in the walls. The sanctuary lamp burned steadily, its small flame unwavering. In that silence, Jesus revealed to her that the trembling of purgatory was not uniform. It intensified when prayers were offered, it softened when Mass was celebrated, it responded especially to acts of sacrifice done quietly, without recognition. This truth overwhelmed her. She realized that the most hidden acts on earth, an unnoticed prayer, a small sacrifice, a whispered chaplet, could send a ripple through purgatory more powerful than anything visible. The souls, she felt, recognized these moments immediately. They leaned toward them, not with urgency born of fear, but with hope born of trust. Faustina remembered how Jesus had once told her that souls in purgatory love God more purely than most souls on earth. Now she understood why. Their love was stripped of distraction, stripped of self-interest, stripped of delay. Their only desire was God. And because of that, every prayer offered for them was received like rain falling on fire, not extinguishing it, but soothing it, guiding it, hastening its work. As the light outside the chapel dimmed, Faustina felt a deep sorrow rise within her, not despair, but compassion. She saw clearly how many souls remain longer in purgatory, not because their purification is severe, but because they are forgotten. The living are distracted. Time moves quickly. Death feels distant. And yet purgatory waits, trembling, responsive, alive with expectation. She bowed her head, tears forming quietly, and whispered a prayer for those souls whose names no one remembers. Souls who have no family left to pray for them. Souls whose graves are unattended. Souls whose lives ended quietly and were quickly forgotten. She felt Jesus receive that prayer with tenderness, as if something unseen shifted in response. In that moment, Faustina understood the urgency of remembrance. The calling she had felt was not dramatic. It was gentle, persistent, faithful. Purgatory trembles because mercy is constantly offered and constantly needed. and the souls continue to call, trusting that love will answer. As evening descended and the convent grew quiet, Faustina felt an interior urgency that would not let her rest. The revelation continued to unfold within her, not as fear, but as responsibility. She understood now that what she had seen was not meant to remain only in her memory. It was meant to shape her life. The trembling of purgatory was not a distant mystery, it was a present reality, dependent on the love offered by souls still walking the earth. She entered the chapel once again, drawn there almost instinctively. The air was cool, the shadows long, and the sanctuary lamp glowed softly like a living heart. Faustina knelt and closed her eyes, allowing herself to be still. In that stillness, Jesus allowed her to feel how deeply the souls in purgatory depend on the mercy of others. They cannot act for themselves. They cannot shorten their purification. Their only strength is love received, love flowing from God, and love offered by the living. This truth weighed heavily on her. She realized that many people believe purgatory to be distant and impersonal, something abstract and theological. But Jesus showed her that purgatory is relational. It lives in connection, it responds to love. When the living forget the dead, the fire continues its work, but without relief. When the living remember them, something shifts, something trembles, something moves. Faustina felt a sorrow that pierced her gently. She thought of the countless souls who had lived quietly, died quietly, and were now waiting quietly, souls with no one left on earth to remember them, no one to whisper their name in prayer, no one to offer a mass on their behalf. These souls were not abandoned by God, but they were abandoned by memory, and that abandonment was a suffering few consider. Jesus allowed her to understand that the cries she felt were not cries of desperation, but cries of trust. Souls in purgatory trust completely in divine mercy. They know they are saved, they know heaven awaits, and yet they also know that love offered on earth hastens their joy. Their calling is not anxious, it is patient, faithful, and filled with hope. As Faustina remained in prayer, she felt Jesus draw her attention to something profound. Purgatory trembles not only when prayers are offered, but when hearts change. When a soul on earth chooses mercy, forgiveness, sacrifice, or repentance, that love does not remain isolated. It passes through the mystical body of Christ, reaching even the suffering souls who wait in purification. Love is never contained. It always moves. She placed her hand over her heart, deeply moved by this truth. She saw how closely the living and the dead are bound together in God's plan, how no act of love is ever wasted, how every moment of compassion creates unseen movement in places no human eye can see. The chapel remained silent, but Faustina felt surrounded, by angels, by souls, by the gentle nearness of Christ himself. The trembling she had witnessed now made sense. It was the movement of mercy responding to love. The following morning, Faustina awoke before the bell rang, her heart already alert. The calling she had felt from the suffering souls had not faded with sleep. It lingered, steady and insistent, like a quiet knock that refuses to be ignored. As she sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the pale morning light slipping through the window, she understood that Jesus was teaching her not only what purgatory is, but how a soul should respond to it. She made her way to the chapel while the convent still rested in silence. The wooden door opened softly, and the familiar scent of wax and incense greeted her. Kneeling before the tabernacle, Faustina felt the presence of Jesus with an unusual closeness. It was there that he impressed upon her heart a truth both simple and demanding. Love must become action. Compassion must move. Mercy must be lived. She realized that the trembling of purgatory was not meant to stir fear in the living, but responsibility. Every soul on earth carries within their hands the power to relieve suffering beyond this life. A prayer whispered with sincerity, a mass offered with intention, a sacrifice embraced without complaint. These acts, hidden and small, become immense in the eyes of heaven. As she prayed, Faustina understood why the souls were calling. They were not asking for miracles. They were asking for remembrance, for the living to pause and look beyond themselves, to widen the circle of love beyond the limits of time. Their call was an appeal to charity, not desperation. Later that day, while performing her duties in the kitchen, Faustina offered each task silently for the souls she had seen. She peeled vegetables slowly, attentively, turning even the smallest actions into intercession. With each act, she felt a quiet certainty that something unseen was responding. She could not see Purgatory tremble now, but she knew it did. Jesus allowed her to understand that many souls would be released from purification not through grand acts, but through countless small offerings made by ordinary people who chose to remember them. Purgatory waits not for heroes but for lovers, for souls willing to extend mercy beyond death. This understanding filled Faustina with both humility and urgency. She saw clearly that time on earth is brief, but love reaches beyond it. And those who use their days to offer mercy participate in the work of heaven itself. She felt deeply that neglecting the souls in purgatory was not a neutral choice. It was a missed opportunity to love where love is most needed. As evening approached, Faustina returned to prayer with a heart newly resolved. She whispered the names of souls she remembered, and many she did not. She prayed for strangers, for forgotten ones, for those no one else recalled. And in that prayer she felt a peace settle over her, a quiet assurance that mercy never falls into emptiness. The calling had found its answer, not in words, but in love. That night, as the convent surrendered once more to silence, Faustina returned to the chapel for the final time that day. The sanctuary lamp glowed softly, unwavering, like a promise that never sleeps. She knelt slowly, her heart calm but awake, aware that the revelation Jesus had given her was now complete. What remained was not fear but clarity. She understood at last why purgatory trembles. It trembles because love is active. It trembles because mercy is moving. It trembles because heaven and earth are not separated by distance, but joined by charity. The souls she had felt calling were not trapped in despair. They were held in hope. Their purification was intense, but their trust was absolute. Faustina realized that the greatest misunderstanding about purgatory is the belief that it is a place of abandonment. Jesus had shown her the opposite. Purgatory exists because God refuses to abandon a soul that loves him. It is the final place where mercy completes its work, removing every last shadow so that the soul may enter glory without fear, without division, without stain. She bowed her head and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not only for the souls being purified, but for the mercy that allowed her to witness their longing. She saw clearly now that the calling she felt was not meant for her alone. It was meant for the Church, for every soul still living, still capable of loving, still capable of remembering. Jesus allowed her to feel one final truth settle gently into her heart. The souls in purgatory are closer to heaven than to earth, but they are closer to our prayers than most people realize. Every prayer crosses that distance instantly. Every act of love finds its way. Nothing offered with sincerity is ever lost. Faustina remained kneeling, letting this certainty anchor her soul. She knew that when the living remember the dead, the fire responds. The trembling shifts, the waiting shortens, and joy draws nearer. This was the hidden cooperation Jesus had entrusted to her, to remind the world that mercy does not end at death. She rose slowly and made the sign of the cross, her movements gentle and reverent. The night felt different now, not heavy but full. As she walked back to her cell, she felt peace settle over her like a veil. The calling she had heard no longer echoed with urgency. It rested, answered by love. Before extinguishing the small candle in her room, Faustina whispered once more, with a quiet firmness born of trust, "Jesus, I trust in you." And in that trust, she knew that every soul who calls will be heard, every fire will complete its work, and every trembling will one day give way to eternal light. The candle went out. The room fell into darkness. But the work of mercy continued.